Okay, so in this tutorial, we're going to use some of the tools that we just looked at um, to kind of quickly go through and build um, an app icon. And we're going to do this. This is another way that Illustrator gets used all the time, is to make icons for programs and things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to just look at a couple of the simple tools, how to build up an image, and then also kind of look at how to use gradients a bit more. All right, so let's get started and do this. So first, I've got this custom square thing that's 2048 pixels by 2048 pixels. I also have one that's 1024 by 1024. It doesn't really matter as long as it's square. So just go ahead and hit create. You can see some goofing off I did there, flash before your eyes really quickly. Okay, so here there are, if we search for Instagram icons, there's many different Instagram icons out there. Right, they have a range of them. We all know the general shape, right? Everybody knows this rounded square with a circle in the middle and a dot here is the Instagram icon, right? Now, there's a bunch of different variations that in terms of gradients that they use and how gradients are used and whether it's the inverse or the, or not. And so in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to start with this, and I'm also going to show you how to make this using this. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this style thing, and I don't know if this TechCrunch image is going to be all that big. Oh my goodness, it's a GIF of all of these different Instagram icons. So that one in particular, the one that's the still here, which maybe I can just go ahead and zoom in on here so we don't have to deal with all of that, and deselect it so it's bright. Right, so what I want you to see is that, right, there's some bluish, there's like a deep blue here, there's, an orange, yellow-orange here that fades into this pink and then goes into that purple, and it looks like it's kind of radial, maybe. Whereas this is definitely like a linear one, but radial, right, you've got these essentially like rings of color, right? So it's warmer here and it spreads out in a radial fashion in all directions rather than just a linear fashion. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll come back to this and look at it for reference, right? Using references is, hugely important and a really effective way to work. So I'm going to go back to Illustrator, and so the first thing we need to do is we're going to need that big background rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a rounded rectangle. Now, we could use a rounded rectangle, or we could just use the rectangle tool and round the corners ourselves. It doesn't really matter. I might just start with the base rectangle, and I'm just going to make it as big as the artboard. Now, if I hold down Shift, right, that's going to make sure that it's scaling evenly. And so far, so good. Right, I've got this rectangle here. It's totally white. Let's give it a solid color for the time being. It doesn't matter what it is, just something so that we know what is and is not the artwork that we're working on. Then the other thing is, because I don't know if I was on exactly 0, 0 up here, which, by the way, in terms of coordinates in this system, 0, 0 is the top left corner. And this would be 2048, 2048 in my case, or whatever your maximum resolution is in the bottom corner. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Properties, and you'll see that my X and Y is 1023 and 1024. What I actually want this to be is probably 1024 and 1024 to be at the right spot. And then you can see over here, it's actually 2048 and 2048. So that's the correct dimensions. That's the most important part about this. Okay. So let's go ahead and use our Move tool, or our Selection tool, which is the letter V. And we're going to go ahead and just pull these corners in. Now, I'm going to just look back at my reference and see how tight those corners are. It looks like some of them are much further rounded than others. In this case, it's not that rounded. So I went a little bit far. I'm going to actually pull this back up just a touch. Okay. We definitely do not need a stroke on here, so I'm going to click on the stroke. And I'm doing this all with this object selected, right? Whatever object, if I have an object selected and I change these, it's going to change that. That can be really frustrating, because if I want to, say, make a rectangle, and maybe I actually want it to have, like, I don't know, a blue fill. If I click on it right now while I have this selected, I'm going to change the color of the existing object. So I'm just going to undo that. And then, right, if I wanted to draw something else, I just need to make sure that I deselect that first object, then change the color value, and then go back, and then I can draw the next object that I want to draw, right? So that's something that it catches me all the time, and I'm sure you will get caught too. But one thing we want to do is we want to make sure we select this object and we turn off our stroke because we do not need that at all. And then let's go ahead and see how we create and modify a gradient, right? So that's looking okay. You know, we can always adjust our corners and make them tighter. We could even bring this in and use it as like a, you know, use one of these things as a base, like as what we're working on, but we're not going to do that right now, just for speed. So, right, so I've got my object set. You know, if I want these corners to be a little less rounded, I can make them a little less rounded, whatever floats your boat. So I've got this object. Let's go ahead and figure out how we can do gradients. So first, we need to go ahead and select our object and go to our fill, and we need to create a fill. Now there's one or two radial options here. There's this gold ring and there's summer, right? These others are linear gradients. If I select one of these, right, it's going to give me this simple radial gradient. And so now the question is, well, how do I edit this and how do I change this to make it the gradient that I want? And how do I find other default gradients? So first, to find other gradients that are defaults, and this it goes for, you know, any material we want. There's this little icon over here in the corner when I have my fill open that looks like library books on a shelf, right? Which is what I want. There's also a bunch of other things that you can do here, but we're really going to focus on this to start with. So I click on this swatch libraries, and I have a whole bunch of different types of swatches. Now these swatches, some of them are just a set of colors. Some of them have patterns or other materials on them, and some of them, like this one, like here, are gradients, right? If I click on earth tone and I zoom back out so I can actually see where that came in, you'll see that, oops, it's brought up this additional window, and you'll see I actually have two tabs here because I was working with gradients earlier. But so, right, earth tones, it's just a collection of earth tone colors that I can choose from. If I go ahead and come back over here and click on this again and go down to gradients, you'll see there's a ton of different options here. Now, none of these in particular are focused on radial stuff, but there's all of these other options that we can click on, and they'll just automatically fill in, right? And so some of these are maybe close, but we're not going to worry about this too much. I just wanted to show you that there are lots of defaults that already exist that you can bend to your will. And so what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and close this, even though I just showed you how to open it. We're going to select summer because it's already radial. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click on the gradient tool that allows us to modify these gradients. You'll note I have a couple ways to do that, right? I've got a gradient selected as my fill. And if I have my properties open, right, I've got my transform on my object, my appearance, and right below that, because I have a gradient on here, I have this option. And you'll see, right, I could turn this into a linear gradient. I could turn this into whatever this third option is as well. Oops, I don't know what, it took it a while to update for some reason. It's actually not doing anything, and it's thinking, but nothing's happening. So let's go ahead and just go back to radial. And when I do that, you'll note that it also has selected this tool. This is the gradient tool. The letter G is the shortcut because gradients are used a lot. And with a radial gradient, there's a few things to note. First, I'm going to zoom out just a touch, just so I can expand beyond this. So I want to tell you about the different parts of this tool before we get going any further. So first, there are when your cursor turns into a little hand, that means you can slide one of these values along this curve. And so there are 2 points here, and if I click on one of them, you'll note that my properties over here change. You should have your properties open now, just so you can see this. But your properties changed, and it says color stop. And right, and it has a color. It has this fill. It doesn't have a stroke. The opacity is 100%. Right? Those are the things that I'm most concerned about. But the color stop is what sets this color. So this interior color is white. And if I click out here on this orange one, right, my fill color is this solid orange color. And what the gradient does is the program determines how it should fade from white to orange in this case. And one of the things that controls that is this item here, which allows us to adjust basically how quickly that transition happens from orange to white. Do we want a bigger, bright spot of pure white before we fade gently to orange? Do we want it to be more like a ring like this? Or do we want it to just be a tiny little dot somewhere in the middle? Right, so to change the colors of a color stop, right, all you do is you select the color stop, and you can really go to any one of these options here, and you can go and say, okay, well, I know dark blue is kind of the color I want on the outside. So let's go ahead and choose a dark blue from our swatches. And then we know that a yellow, like a bright yellow color, is what we want for the inside. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a bright yellow. Right, now there's another color that comes in here, and if I pop back over here, you'll see, right, there's this yellowish orange that goes to kind of a reddish pink color, and then finally fades to a deep blue. And so what we need is we need another color stop. The way that you can create an additional color stop is by hovering just off the edge until this arrow turns white and there's a plus sign. And when I click on that, it'll create another color stop. And what it does is it will just, whatever pixel I'm on is the color that that color stop becomes, right? So it's going to be somewhere between yellow and blue. And now if I have that selected and I come up to either my swatches or use whatever color choice I want and say, okay, well, it's not really a magenta, it's more like this red here. Whew, that is intense. Maybe I need to tone it down a touch. All right, so I've got that toned down, right? So now I've got this 3-color gradient, but right, the transition point between the this pink and the deep blue is really short. And so what I need to do first is just to spread this out some, right? And when we look at the image, and we're going to make some other adjustments to this as well, but I really want to be able to pull this out so we get some more orange in there, and maybe just move this whole thing out a little bit further, because we really want this like range of orange, pink, and blue, right? Right, those are the colors that are in here, and we're not going to make this perfect, right? It's just an example to get close enough. We could use a color picker to actually choose the colors, but we're not going to do that right now. Okay, so other settings. If I hover over this bar and the arrow is black, if I click and drag, I can actually move this gradient around the image, right? So I can change the center point. Now, in our case, the center point is somewhere, it appears to be somewhere around the bottom third, right? It's not perfect. You can actually see how it kind of curves off. And this may be a more complex gradient than we're working with now, but it's fine. And this is a good example too, right? So you can see, right, it really kind of, the center is actually not even probably on screen, or it's just barely on screen here. And then it fades out to these other colors. So, so we can go ahead and continue to move this down. And you'll note that, right, everything's fine except this is really small and I need to make it larger. So there's a couple other options I've got here. One is that, right, I can scale things in a non-uniform way. So I can scale my circle that way. I can come over here, and if I grab this other circle, right, I can scale this uniformly. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and try and pull this up as much as possible. And you'll see that now this orange and yellow is starting to really sing a bit, and it's, it's getting closer to that gradient that's in this original image. And you can see that maybe there's a couple that maybe they have 2 gradients going on that are interacting. I'm not really 100% sure how they made this icon, but we're getting close. We should have a bit more purple and barely any of the deep blue, except in that upper corner. So you can see that, right, maybe I need to make a couple more adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and move this here. I'm going to zoom out so I can see this a little bit better. And the question is, do I want to make this larger, or do I want to, I kind of want to make it a little bit larger, and maybe then I'm just going to be okay with, with this being the way that it is. Now, one other thing you can do is if you hover over here, this is another way you can extend and contract that diameter. You can also, if you're just outside the edge of it, you can rotate it as well. Now, this is a radial gradient, so it doesn't really matter. Having it at an angle like this just makes it so that the whole tool is visible on top of the artboard, which would be, totally fine if you want. If we increase this size a little bit more, but then pull this slider down, we can also start to get, something that's maybe a little bit closer. So let's say we're happy with this, right? We've learned how to use the gradient tool. Again, if we wanted to, we could switch this to linear right now. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Just for a second, you can see how it changes things. Oops. And if I click on the wrong thing, things go sideways really quick. But so here's where rotation can make a change, right? Because I can rotate, what this looks like as it goes through. I'm going to undo that and undo that. So I have my radial gradient again. All right, so let's go ahead and do our next step. So now we just need the graphics that go on top. And you might already have thought about how we can do those. So one thing that we're going to do to make our lives easier is we're going to use our selection tool, and we're going to select this base rounded rectangle, and we're going to copy and paste it. Now, the only issue is in Illustrator, when you copy and paste, if I hit Command or Control C and then Command or Control V, it offsets the pasted object, right? That makes it a lot easier to know you've made a copy, and sometimes it's useful, but there's a special command in Illustrator that allows you to paste in front of the object you just copied, and that means it's exactly where in the same position as the previous object. And to do that, you hold down Command or Control, you hit C to copy, and then you hit F to paste in front. And when you do that, you won't see anything happen. But if I go to my Layers panel and I pop this open, now I have two rectangles that are directly on top of each other. And so with this top one, I'm going to go ahead and scale this down. And to do that, I'm going to, oops, not going to zoom way out. I'm going to hover over the corner. I'm going to click, and then I'm going to hold down the Shift and Option keys so that I'm scaling this around the center. Right? And you'll see that the gradient inside that is changing. But I'm just going to pull this down until it's like, let's just say 1500 pixels or somewhere around there. Looks like 1506. It fits. And that's because that's about the outside of this ring. There's about the same width there. And so let's go ahead and hop back. Now, we don't need a fill on this one at all, right? So we're going to turn the fill off. But what we do need is we need a stroke. And so I'm going to go ahead and make a white stroke. And then right now my stroke is only 1 pixel wide. And so what I really need to do is I need to take this and make it, I think I found that 80 pixels seems to be about right with the dimensions of my artboard. And again, I'm going to zoom in. If you want to have something zoom to fill the entire window, all you do is you hold down Command or Control on Windows, and you hit the number 0 on the keyboard, and that'll pop this up to full size. Okay, so I've got this set, but there's a couple changes I can make. First, I want you to note where the stroke is in relation to the edge of the shape. Right now, the stroke is set to the inside of the edge. Now, this may not be the case on your machine. I'm not 100% sure what it defaults to at this point. But what we need to do is open up some of these additional stroke settings. We haven't really talked about any of this yet, but let's go ahead and click on the word stroke. And what that does is it'll open up the stroke panel, and we can set our stroke weight here, right? That's that 80 pixels, but we have a lot of other options here that we can use as well. In our case, there isn't a whole lot we need to adjust, except the thing I really wanted to show you is how you can align the stroke, right? So this is how the stroke is currently aligned, right? This blue outline goes around the outside edge of our stroke. If I click here, that stroke is going to be bridged across the middle. It's going to be centered on that line. If I click here, it's going to be on the outside of that line. Now, in our case, if I zoom out just a touch, which is always a joy to try and do, it looks like maybe actually having this centered, and something else is, right, the shape is a little different on each side, right? Because now the outside edge is conforms to this curve. But if I was to go back and switch this to here, right, it's the outside corner, the inside corner is tighter. And so if I look at the original artwork we're trying to mimic, let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit. Right, the question is, how hard are these corners? And I would say it looks like this is on, the stroke was aligned to the inside, right? That's just my guess. Okay, so I've got this stroke aligned to the inside. You could also do the center. It really doesn't matter, whatever you feel looks best in this case and feels the most balanced. Okay, so now we've done that. We need to now draw the lens and to draw the little, I don't know if it's a flash or a viewfinder or what that little dot is supposed to be. Well, let's go ahead and draw the lens. So what we need to do is we need to take our rectangle tool, we need to come down and use an ellipse. And then I'm just going to hold down Option, so I'm drawing from the center. And I'm going to hold down Shift, so I make sure to draw a circle and not an ellipse. And I'm just going to pull this out until it's about, it seems proportional to whatever's in our original artwork, right? It seems like in all of these, this gap here is about the same thickness as this gap here. So maybe I need to make this circle a little bit bigger. So again, I'm going to hold down, I'm going to click to start shaping this. Then I'm going to hold down Shift and Option and pull this out until those gaps are about the same. Okay, so there's about the same distance. Now, something else you'll notice is that there's less space up here than there is down here. This isn't very centered. So how do I center this object? Well, fortunately, with this tool set, with this object selected, I have several options up here that allow me to align it. Now, if these alignment options are not available up here, I can select them. I can select this here, and there's a bunch of different alignment options here. So with this selected, I can start to align it. Now, the question is, what do I want to align it to? By default, if I click here, it's set to align to selection. Now, the only thing that's selected is this one object. So what I really want to do is align this to the artboard. So I'm going to select Align to Artboard, and then I'm going to click Center in this direction, and I'm going to click Center in this direction. And that will center that lens in the middle of the image, and there should be an even amount of space on all four sides. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our little dot. Now, for the little dot, right, we need to do a little bit of a switch, right? So I still need an ellipse, but I want there to be fill and no stroke. And so the quickest way to do that is to click on this little swap fill and stroke button that's right here next to it. And you'll notice that I forgot to deselect this, so I'm going to say undo. I'm going to hit the letter V on the keyboard to get my selection tool. I'm just going to click in space, and then I'm going to switch this, and I'm going to hit the letter L for ellipse, right? That's the L. And now that I've done that, I'm going to cancel this, and I'm just going to go ahead and click drag and hold down Shift and put it somewhere up here in the corner. Now, it's not where I want it in the end, but it's in an all right place for now. And again, I could go back and reference this and make sure that it's the right scale. It's pretty close. It doesn't really matter, right? This is more about learning the tools than making a perfect copy of this icon. And so the last couple things we need to do is like, well, how am I going to align this, and what does it look like it's aligned, to in this item here? And it looks like it's like a little bit off the boundary, and it may just be kind of centered in this corner. Um, so there's a couple ways that I could figure that out, but one of the simplest things to do is to create something called a guide. And so to create guides, you go up to the view window at the top of the screen, and there's a ton of options here. And so just watch as I go down and down and down and down. And there's there's one thing I need to do before I can see my guides or use my guides. So I need to go to rulers and go to show rulers. And what that does is it creates these edges that give me, right, the number of pixels, where my artboard is located, and just sort of a rough system of measurement. Once I've done that, to create a guide is pretty simple. I can go ahead and if I want to create a horizontal guide, I go to this top bar, I click in the ruler, and I start dragging down, and you'll see this fine dashed line come down. And really what I want to do is I want to, I'm going to say wherever this edge moves from being a curve or being, straight to being curved is where I want this guide to be. So I'm going to let this go. And you'll see that that's created this guide. And then I want to create a vertical guide, and I want that to be at the same point here. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag and create that other guide. And now if I use the move tool, if I hit the letter V, I can go ahead, or selection tool, I can go ahead and I can get this pretty close. Now, there's ways to get this to snap. For our case, doesn't really matter. I can also nudge this around, right? I can get it close using my mouse or my trackpad, but then to nudge it, you use the arrow keys. And so if I use the arrow keys, I can nudge it these tiny little bits until I'm happy with where it is. Now, I have no idea if this is anywhere near where they actually have this. I think it's actually probably a little bit further up based on the look of things. Right? But this just shows us how you use guides, right? So you can use guides to help you align objects and, subdivide your artwork and everything. So with these two guides, the other thing you can do, right, is if you click on a guide, you should be able to move the guide. I have no idea why I can't move it. I don't think they're locked, but let's go ahead and check. So, I should be able to click on this thing, highlight it in a deeper blue, and move it. But for some reason, it's not allowing me to do that. So let's go to View, and I'm going to go to Guides. And yeah, for some reason, my guides are locked. So I'm going to click Unlock Guides. And then when I click on them now, right, they highlight in blue, and I can adjust them, right? And so they aren't rendering really well on my screen right now for some reason, but right. So if I wanted to adjust these, right, I can bring these in and adjust, drag them around a little bit, and then move my object somewhere else. Now, the other thing is I can do I want to keep these guides or do I want to get rid of them? Do I want to hide them? Right? If I'm going to use them again, if I go down to guides, I can go to hide guides, or I can go to release guides or clear guides. Right? So I'm just going to go ahead and hit clear guides because we won't need them any further because we have made this image. Now, this is great and all, but remember one of the things I said is we were going to make this inverted version of this as well. And so how do we do that? We hope that we stop getting a million emails in the middle of this tutorial. So how do we do that? So what we do is first we need to learn about something called a group, right? One of the things that is really frustrating is say you have 3 items that you want to use. And you're, in this case, for some reason, I'm having a really hard time selecting them, right? But so I have these 3 objects. And rather than having to manually select all 3 of them all the time, what I would like to do is be able to manipulate them as a group. Maybe I want all of them to be scaled up, but to maintain their internal relationships in terms of, the distance from the center to this one, to the outside edge here should remain proportional. And so I want them to be grouped. Or maybe I just have a bunch of stuff on here and I need to be able to drag this around as one thing. And so grouping is the way that we do that. If we click on our layers menu, all right, I have these 3 items selected. And so I just want to show you what happens when you create a group. Now, creating a group, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can hit Command or Control G to create a group, or you can just go up to Object and go down to Group. And when I do that, you'll note that now there's this, this group shows up here. And if I flip this open, it's got all three of those elements inside, right? And I can go ahead and turn them on and off and do some other work with them. So I've got these things set as a group, right? So now if I deselect that and I click on it, and I click on something that I can actually, there we go. Notice that it's only when I click on the path of this object that I select it, right? If I click on the stroke out here, it's like I'm not clicking on anything. That's just something to note. So I'm going to deselect all of this. I'm going to click here. And then right now, these all move around as a group. If I wanted to scale them, I can scale them all as a group, right? They even can be scaled in whatever form I want. And you'll note as rounded rectangles get smaller, they turn into circles. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and undo a couple of those motions. So I've created this group, which allows me to have these elements together. So now the last thing that I want to do is I want to invert this, right? I want to have a white background with just the gradient inside these lines. Now, to do that, I want to create a couple other objects so I can show you what we're going to do, and then we're going to try to apply it here and see that it doesn't work, and we'll introduce another really amazing tool that that Illustrator has. So let's go ahead and create, it could be a rounded rectangle, it could be whatever you want it to be, right? I'm just going to create something, round the corners, and then I want to create a shape that's kind of blobby, right? And so go ahead and use your curvature tool, and whatever the case, we want it to be able to be on top of this in some way, shape, or form. So I'm just going to create, something that's a little bit wiggly over here. This should be great. Right, so I've created this little shape here, and you know what? I'm going to go ahead and create a couple more shapes and give them different colors on top of this. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe I'll make another rounded rectangle and change the color to teal, and make another one, sure, and a third. Okay, so I've created multiple objects, and I need to, so that I have something that this thing is going to modify, it's going to clip. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these objects over here. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command or Control G to group them, right? So now they will be selected as one object. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab this other object, and you'll note that it looks like it's going behind it. I'm going to change the color so it's easier to see what's going on. So I just made it yellow. It doesn't matter what color you make it. Yeah, this is behind it. So I want to bring this to the front. So to do that, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go down to Arrange, Bring to Front. All right, so now it's in front, and I'm going to set it on top of this. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to select the object underneath. Now what we're doing is we're going to do something called we're going to create something called a clipping mask. And what a clipping mask does is it takes whatever this top artwork is, whatever this top shape is, and it clips whatever is underneath it so that it only is exposed within the bounds of this object, right? And so I've selected, you have to select the object you're clipping, which is this group, and then the object you want to clip with. And the object you want to clip with should be on top of the object you are clipping. So to do that, I go up to the Object menu, and I go down to Clipping Mask, and I click Make. Right? And so now I've got this group that's only visible in this shape that I made earlier with my shaper tool, right? So, I could make my own icon, I don't know, for, squareogram or something like that, I don't know. Right? But so I've done that. So I want to do the same thing with these items. What I'd like to do is be able to just clip these items, is to take this group and have it clip this other group, so this other object. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to select this object, I'm going to hold down Shift, I'm going to select the background object, and I'm going to hit Command or Control 7 on the keyboard, or I could go up to Object and hit Clipping Mask and Make. When I do that, this is not what I want to have happen. So what's going on? The issue is that there's a couple things going on, but one, the fill color is what determines if something is clipped. And we actually have a lot of problems with this, right? We've got multiple shapes in here that are essentially overlapping each other, right? So we've got this one boundary here, and then we've got these two other boundaries. If I was to, right, even with just a stroke on, only select one of these objects and try and clip this, it would work really well. But right now, we've got a problem because it's 3 objects that we're trying to clip one object with. Even though this is a group, it's still the geometry is overlapping itself, and Illustrator just doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know what we want it to do. So we have to take a couple extra steps to tell it what to do. And those extra steps are pretty simple. So first, we're going to select this. And what we really want is we want these strokes to be shapes. We don't want this just to be a line. We want it to have mass. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to Object, and we're going to go down to Path, and we're going to say Outline Stroke. And when I do that, you'll notice that now there's no center line, but I've created these are actual 3 shapes, right? And so that's pretty exciting. But now what I need to do is, you can say like, okay, well, maybe this will work. So I'm going to hold down Shift, I'm going to select, I'm going to hit Command 7 or Control 7, and I still get the same result. And that's because even though these have been outlined and everything, there's still these overlapping bits of geometry or shape. So what I need to do is I need to take one more step to make this work. And so I'm going to deselect all these objects. I'm going to select just the group. I'm going to go to Object, and I'm going to go down to Compound Path and Make. And what this does is it's going to take all of these things that are within this group, and it should turn them into one piece, one object. So I'm going to leave my Layers panel open with this group flipped open so we can see what happens. I'm going to go to Object, I'm going to go to Compound Path, and I'm going to go to Make. And when I do that, right, the group disappears. This is a compound path, which means it's treated as one singular cohesive object. And now if I hold down Shift and select the background and hit Command or Control 7, then I have the clipping mask on here. Now, something to note, the clipping mask works as a group, and we're going to talk about this in a second. So let's say that I've made this mask, but I want to scale not the whole image. I actually want this, the gradient to stay put, but I want my, this mask to actually be expanded so it's a little larger in here, and it covers more of the gradient so I get some of the deep blue and more of the bright yellow here at the bottom. So how do I do that? What I do is I need to be able to edit that. And so there's a couple ways you can edit these things. First, I can come in here and just deselect everything. And if I open up my clipping mask here, I can click on the item that I want to select on the very far right of this little window. And now I can edit this independently. So if I hold down Option and Shift, but if I click and drag first, hold down Option and Shift, right, I can scale this out, and you can see that, right, as this gets bigger, I get more of that gradient involved, right? So I can go ahead. That's one way I can do that. The other way I can do it is if I click on this, right, it's going to select my whole clipping mask or my whole group. And this works with clipping masks and groups. And then if I double click on this item, what happens is it pops me into something called isolation mode. In isolation mode, you'll notice this item is kind of grayed out. It actually just jumps me into the clip group and allows me to select the different elements of the clipping group as though they were their own items, right? And so right now it's being aggravating because it's there we go, because I wasn't selecting one of the paths, but right, so I can either select this background thing that's hidden, and I could move that, or I can select this foreground item if I hover over the right spot. to do so. And once I'm hovering over this, then if I wanted to say shrink it again, right, I could scale this or, do whatever I want to it. Okay. All right, and there we go. This is a simple tutorial that showed how to make clipping masks, how to make some basic shapes, and then how to take some of the tools that we talked about the first time and use them to actually make some artwork that's, um, that's literally used in the professional world. Right. This is a very, very simple icon design that is recognizable all over the world and was most likely made in Illustrator. Yeah, and you've just made it as well.